Good evening, friends. Good afternoon. It's my apologies for the slight delay in this gathering. I'm sorry, but we're here now. So let's take a moment, really just align ourselves at the center of the even arm cross. Standing at the heart center of the new group of world servants, with all occult servants from all traditions. Aligning with the great ashram hierarchy and with the Christ. And aligning with the new group of world servants. We say together the mantra of the new group. May the power of the one life pour through the group all true serves. May the love of the one soul characterize the lives of all who seek to aid the great ones. May we fulfill our part in the one work through self-forgiveness, harmlessness, and right speech. Thank you, and welcome to this new moon meditation meeting when we're meeting in the energy of Virgo still. We're living through a time of heightened spiritual tension. Forces of separation, division, and materialism are so stimulated, it seems, in all countries of the world and in all sections of society. Yet at the same time, forces of light within humanity, centered in a recognition of some way of the oneness of life and in the radiance of the heart, are emerging today as never before. The most seemingly varied organisms are being brought together through the action of the heart. And this is happening even across remote distances. This is what it means to live in a time of heightened spiritual tension, when lunar and solar forces are in relationship, the mother and the child. In the intensity of this tension, many fall into the endless trap of wanting to stand with one or the other, with the mother or with the child about to be born. And sometimes standing with one, blaming others for the divisions in the world. Feeling hopeless in the face of waves of hatred. Agonizing over the pain of apparent separation between mother and child. So today, at this new moon in Virgo, let us shine a light on what's happening within the new group of world servers during this time of heightened spiritual tension. And let us consider the role that hope plays within the new group. For although the raging battles around themes of freedom, democracy, authoritarianism, nationalism, and violence take up so much of the psychic space of this time, it is our task to see with absolute clarity the solidity of the new group, recognizing that beyond all the attention that's given to the forces of separation, the group of deepening servers engaging in the world in a spirit of service to the building of right relations is today stronger and deeper in its alignment than at any previous time. And it is this that provides the substance for substantial hope and the evidence of the new synthesis that is in process of being born. Virgo leads us to consider the dualities of the human condition, so often today reflected in crude and ungenerous thoughts about the other side. Virgo leads us to consider these dualities less in terms of two warring dualities, and more as a dynamic, creative environment through which something new is coming to birth. A labor. Christ in you, the hope of glory. So where should we be looking to discern the spirit of the Christ that is this hope of glory in our times? This gives us a way of thinking about current divisions that is less about blaming the other side for the problems of the world or the divisions in society, less about my way as the only way, and more about a detached observation of where the principles of the plan are reaching into the psyche, into our cultures and nations, and provoking thought about universal values that go beyond simple slogans and memes, so that we can begin to see what is emerging. It's about each of us seeking out those who are universal in their thought and who are motivated by a will to share and to build better relations with the environment, better relations between minorities, all minorities, including racial minorities and dominant social groups, better relations between religions, and so on. It seems to me that as we approach this issue of seeking out what is new and what is being born in the respectful relations between human beings and the environment, or between capital and labor, or between the religions, we begin to see something of a new spirit of discipleship that is alive in a way that has never been alive before in humanity. This is not necessarily the classic discipleship of the Christian churches, or even of the ageless wisdom, although those concentrated fields of discipleship are surely in process of moving to a higher point of tension and synthesis at this time, and therefore playing a significant role. But in a wider sense, it's more that a deeper or higher or more inclusive universal sense of purpose is taking root within more and more people of goodwill. Can be characterized by a genuine love of the spirit of goodness and wholeness that is within the human. Goodness within you, the hope of glory. And a concentration of the life to the service of the higher principle of goodness within the human. The most recent issue of the World Goodwill Newsletter develops the theme of hope as a spiritual potency, with articles from a range of perspectives. The Ageless Wisdom understanding of a centennial conclave, for example, is discussed as a source of hope that can have universal significance beyond the small confines of the esoteric community. A hope that can radiate through the wider discipleship community. In the newsletter, hope is also considered from the perspective of this year's Jubilee Year theme in the Catholic Church, with its focus on pilgrims of hope, and with its targeted attempt through a vast network of activities to transform debt into hope. Looking at the role of debt in modern Western societies and the role that national debt plays in many of the economically poorer nations of the world, and drawing on the theme of the Book of Revelations to urge a just redistribution of global resources, including the cancellation of unpayable debts that lock whole nations out of sustainable development. It's worth noting that the Catholic Church represents over 17% of the global population and includes what are often these days referred to as conservative and progressive ideological colorings, all held together in one community. This international community of believers is being reminded in every church of a principle of the plan, which is referred to in the newsletter as the obvious, though still not fully recognized fact that the world's resources are destined for renewal and distribution, and not for exploitation. This new issue of the newsletter also includes a reflective piece by co-worker Catherine Cruz, meditating on the idea that humanity's expression of goodwill is hope, will, and aspiration can change the world, and giving expression to the thought that all three words, hope, will, aspiration, come into being only in activity. In other words, they're not so much abstract notions than living processes that can almost be seen as the defining characteristics of human transformation and the transformation of societies and nations. To quote from Catherine's article, perhaps a more complete naming of these ideas, hope, will, and aspiration, would be hoping, willing, and aspiring. And in this recognition, the necessity of relationship is born. When that relationship is with the soul and with the divine, the hoping, willing, and aspiring, working in every human heart, become invocation. The newsletter concludes with a piece about the UN General Assembly decision to declare July 12 every year as International Day of Hope, reminding all people of goodwill that hope is, quote, a force that has carried humanity through the darkest of times and propels us toward a future of possibility, resilience, and renewal. The newsletter reminds us that the spirit of hope has little in common with mindless optimism, or with a hope that specific political policies will somehow magically transform the world. For hope is something deeper. As Martin Luther King stated, a deep and wise passion for social justice doesn't come from a superficial optimism. It comes from a deep faith in the possibilities of human beings when they allowed themselves to become co-workers with God. As Václav Havel, another visionary server who's had a huge influence on the modern world, commented, hope is a dimension of the soul, an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. In the deep and powerful sense that Havel is referring to, hope has nothing to do with things going well, but it draws rather on the ability to, quote, work for something because it is good, not just because it has a chance to succeed. Another reason to shine a light on hope right now and during this period of the Virgo new moon is the fact that on Sunday, countless communities of thought, or islands of coherence, as they're sometimes referred to, group fields of thought and orientation as we understand them, we'll be observing the United Nations International Day of Peace with its 2025 theme, Act Now for a Peaceful World, centered essentially in the understanding that cultures of peace are cultures of right relations. And throughout next week's high-level week marking the opening of the UN General Assembly, governments of the world will be presenting their perspective on the great themes of the UN Charter, promoting social progress and better standards of life and larger freedom, and how to address the challenges of practicing tolerance and living together in peace with one another as good neighbors. And governments will be doing this, each with their own perspective, at a time when major wars are raging between certain nations and within certain nations. And all of this is taking place in a year when next month, on October 24th, the UN celebrates its 80th birthday. So right now, we stand together in the best of times and the worst of times. And we can reflect after the meditation on how each one of us understands the idea, Christ in you, the hope of glory, as it relates to our communities, groups and circles of affiliation, nations and peoples in these troubling and chaotic times. Strengthening the hands of the new group of world servants. Group fusion. I am one with my group brothers, and all that I have is theirs. May the love which is in my soul pour forth to them. May the strength which is in me lift and aid them. May the thoughts which my soul creates reach and encourage them. Alignment. We recognize our place as a group within the heart center of the group of world servants. And there we stand. And mentally extend a line of lighted energy towards the spiritual hierarchy, the planetary heart center. To the Christ, the heart of love within the hierarchy. And towards Shambhala, where the will of God is known. the higher interlude. Hold the mind focused on the planetary role of the group of world servers, mediating between hierarchy and humanity, responding to hierarchical impression, and meditating the plan into existence. Meditation. Reflect on the seed thought. Through the impression and expression of certain great ideas, humanity must be brought to the understanding of the fundamental ideals which will govern the new age. This is the major task of the group of world servants. Precipitation. Visualize the precipitation of the will to good, essential love throughout the planet, from Shambhala, through the planetary heart, the hierarchy, through the Christ, the group of world servers, through all men and women of goodwill everywhere in the world, and finally, through the hearts and minds of the whole human family. The lower interlude. Consider the many ways in which the power of the one life and the love of the one soul are working out in the world through members of the group of world servers, and so building the thought form of solution to world problems. distribution. As the great invocation has sounded, visualize the irradiation of human consciousness with light and love and power. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center, where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center, which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. So thank you, friends. So what do we think? Just let's shine a light on hope and share how we understand the idea Christ in you, the hope of glory, as it relates to our communities, groups, nations, and peoples in these very troubling and very divided and chaotic times. Where do we see hope alive in realistic ways in the spirit of humanity?
Just say if anybody'd like to share that's online, they can raise their hand by going to your Zoom toolbar, and we can unmute you and allow you to speak.
I'd like to share. Thank you, Steve, for that very inspired and very important message at this time. I particularly appreciated that you pointed out that holding hope is not for sissies, in a sense, that it's not something that one has to have a very balanced and real life world view of what's really happening, and yet still generate and still hold hope, which is, I think, born from faith, that something can really change. You know, I don't think we need sort of bliss bunnies running around proclaiming we need to be hopeful without a realistic worldview of what's going on. But we also don't need people who are just pessimistic from that, the awareness of that reality as well, and have kind of given up hope. When I think of something like being born again, in terms of Christ in you, the hope of glory, to me, it's the good news of knowing that there is a soul and that there is the possibility of redemption for humanity, that we are not given up on by the Creator, and there is a channel, a spark of that life that gives us the potential to climb our way out of the muck, so to speak. So it's like being born again mentally to the reality that that exists, and that we can call on that, utilize it, draw it forth, and save ourselves, so to speak. So that to me is what, you know, Christ in you, the hope of glory, means.
It's an amazing thing, that idea that, like, this identification of me, I, includes this aspect, the Christ. That realization, that's the essence of, it's like faith. Once there's the knowledge, once Christ is born again in the psyche,
Mind and in your,
that's the substance of hope. That's because you know that. And then the nature of the Christ in the self is to, because it's a radiatory part of the self. It sees the Christ in others.
and there's no turning back.
Exactly. You can't, yeah.
You can't unsee what you've
Yeah,
seen,
yeah.
right?
So the question is how that, where we see that happening, that born again, a true born again, within all different circles of human culture and human thought.
There's a hand here from Peter Luxreal. Should we go to the Zoom? Okay. Peter, go ahead and unmute and share.
Thanks, Michael. Steve, great word today. What comes to mind, putting together what you shared, is the fact that more people are reaching out or reaching in to the heart center. And that is the anchorage point of the Christ. It's within the heart. And as more people begin to meditate through the heart center, uniting the head and the heart, that's the birthing place of the Christ, because it does the work of the redemption of the unprincipled substance that exists as the effluvia within permanent atom and within the aura of humanity, individual and collectively speaking. So the hope essentially is, as humanity, as people, individuals, life streams begin to turn back to the heart, expand that, threefold flame of love, of wisdom, and of willpower, that there will be the revelation of the Christ amongst humanity. And to your point, is that recognition of where we have been self-identifying as the character, as the dweller, we begin to change, elevate our sense of self-identification to that of the Christ and the I am. And that is the hope of redemption of our planet, as well as the system that we are in. Thank you.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Peter. That's beautiful.
I'll share a few thoughts if nobody else has anything else to say. But just first of all, thank you, Steve, for that wonderful talk, very appropriate talk for this time and for Virgo. But reflecting on hope, And also faith as well. They both have to do with the future, essentially, and they both have to do with creativity or bridging to the future. And so in that sense, they definitely have to do with the first ray, actually, and with the will aspect. Of course, we don't truly know the will aspect as it really exists. In the three worlds, the first and second aspects are inseparable. So we really know the first through the second. So, but that aside, this idea that it's the, lost my train of thought, but it's this it's idea of the from the very beginning, the goal of the path is in fact what in esotericism we call initiation, or this journey back to God, and how absolutely powerful that is, and this idea that it's hope or faith at every stage that plays a role in that, I think is really, really significant. At the very beginnings of the path, which is where humanity stands right now as a whole, is a stage of blindness. And so it's important to realize that, first of all, that the Christ consciousness as it descends is actually anchored in the head, and that the effects of that are felt in the heart. So we call it the birth of the Christ in the heart as the first initiation. It's actually, yes, anchored in the heart, but it's because the effects are through the heart, a reorientation of the heart. But in fact, the consciousness that descends at that very important stage, and the one humanity's facing, is a mental thing. And that's so significant because right at the stage of the beginning of the path, the first initiation is a stage of blindness. And for the first time, you really, there's that the story of Saul in the Bible, when he goes blind before he becomes Paul. This is the symbolic representation of this. But I just think sorry, I'm babbling. Just in practical terms, though, what that means, though, is we look at the state of the world today, and we look at what seems to be a descending darkness. And a lot of people see a lot of evil in the world as well. Some people don't see it that way, but that's the way a lot of people are seeing it. And we also see at the same time, like, conflict, adversarialness, people versus people, nation versus nation, group versus group. And we see a lot of conflict also in the realm of ideas. And we see even physical conflict happening in the world. And it's important, part of this stepping onto the path is the ability to distinguish between evil, between darkness, which is just blindness or ignorance, and between tension and between crisis. Those are all very, very different things in the path. And right now, humanity is at a stage where they cannot differentiate all those things one from the other. And some of them which seem bad actually can be spiritually useful, and some which seem sort of spiritually useful are actually, in fact, in many ways, a barrier. And so part of the work of the new group of world servers is really just to clarify the mental atmosphere and to say, okay, well, actually tension can be productive. Actually the goal is this, or the goal is that. Okay, what does inclusivity really mean, for instance, in the context of this, that, or the other? And anyway, I've really.
I think that's terrifically important. For me, the issue is that collectively we are facing an initiation.
Mhm.
And that's what actually this is about.
Yeah.
And it's about humanity becoming the world disciple.
Mhm.
And framing it in that way makes sense of all of the issues that arise through that, because it's an initiation. So there's will involved, there's Shambhala energy involved.
Yeah.
And particularly when we think in this, the Shambhala energy comes in the first 25 years of a century. And this year, the end of the first quarter, that's why it's so significant that we have this in our tradition. There's this idea of a conclave that's been prepared for 100 years. Every 7 years, the masters meeting, observing humanity from their perspective and observing humanity's passage into this initiation. Now we're coming into a peak, which, whatever that means from our time, we have no way of knowing. But it's just all about how we can hold tension, and hold tension as a positive. At going back to my way of thinking, hold it in the heart.
Mhm.
like hold tension in the fiery heart in the head, which relates the near and the far just by doing it.
Yeah.
You talked about the even cross in your talk. You know, if we're talking about the polar opposite to Virgo, that's Pisces, but then the cross that's formed with that and Gemini and Sagittarius, another dual sign, the two pillars, like in Masonry, that represent that tension between the two poles, the two forces. And, you know, I think it's interesting that in the courses in the school, in the arcane school, after people initially come in and get oriented to the idea of the soul, they go into MWS and they're studying two things, two opposite things, the soul and then the problems of humanity. And the idea is holding that tension between the two and not being a bliss bunny, just hanging out in the soul and the monad, but looking at the world and having to find how to manage that tension between the two as a soul. And I think it's extremely important in the work because of that. And we were told that Christ was actually interested in that work that this group was doing for that reason. And
I love the idea of that, just thinking of framing that within the idea that that is invocation. Like that bringing of, from the mystical sense of the lovely, all is light and love and power, all is light and love and peace, bringing into relationship to the problems of humanity. That really is about the even arm cross, and it is about the power of invocation when it's done by occultists.
And the tension between the personality and the soul.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're in Virgo, so we're talking about initiation, the first initiation, the birth of Christ in you. Mm. So it's interesting. We're talking about that in terms of humanity too.
We have some more hands here. Catherine Cruz.
Oh.
Catherine, there you go. Go ahead.
Hello.
Hi, Catherine. Go ahead.
Hi, Michael. I would like to thank you, Steve, for your very kind words, and to everyone who's spoken. Is this such an important and interesting conversation? And I wanted to bring up the great invocation as a source of hope for us as we move through the difficulty of our times. From the very earliest Hebrew scriptures, we are told that God has a plan for the good of humanity. And so this idea is certainly not something that's new, and that our fundamental, essential relationship with God, between humanity and God, means that when we invoke, when we use the invocative, our power of invocation, the evocation response from God is inevitable. It can't fail. So being reminded that we go through a period of blindness is helpful to me, because there are times when it seems like it's hard to see the light, but we can be reminded that Christ is all and is in all, and that our use of the great invocation is immensely powerful in terms of making the plan for humanity become manifest in the light. So I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but thank you very much.
I don't think you're rambling at all, Catherine. Listening to that, to me, one of the things about about dark times is that the invocation is often more, it's not so much it's intense, it's a cry from the heart. So it's a completely contrived, and in a way, in the darkest times, for the truly, I don't know how you'd put it, like the truly esoteric or also the truly religious folks who truly have faith, the darkest of times can produce this cry from this depth of a cry that as you say, and that is perfectly and beautifully brought in, concentrated in the Great Invocation. And so in a way, when we use the Great Invocation, all of us, the more we can somehow, with one part of ourselves, be tuning into this cry from the heart that's sometimes unconscious, but it's really there. God, I mean, all of us must feel that, whoever we're talking to, this, what's going on, I don't know what, to bring that into to help fuel our use of the Great Invocation with that.
The masters talk about demand. The masters talk about demand.
Yeah.
Demanding the light.
Yeah.
There's another hand here from David Trice. Go ahead, David, after you unmute yourself.
Hello?
Hi,
We
David.
hear you beautifully.
Okay, great. I'd just like to expand upon what Steve said about faith and hope. I posted an excerpt from the Problems of Humanity, or no, I have before me an excerpt from the Problems of Humanity. I'd like to read it to you. It's very short. Another point which we should be remembered is that the new generation lies hope through repudiation of the ancient and undesirable, hope because of their ceaseless demand for spiritual light, hope because of the promptness of which they recognize truth wherever it to be found, in the church or out of it, and hope because having been born in the midst of a ruined world and a general chaos, they are ready for rebuilding. Steve, I think you hit it right on the head there, that faith and hope are intertwined. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thanks, David. That's very lovely. That's thank you for that.
John Heron.
Thank you, friends. This is our second new moon in Virgo, a not very common occurrence. New moon being the lower interlude. And if we look at the keynote, I am the mother and the child. I, God, I matter, am. It might seem that we're directed more towards the lower interlude of that, the two dualities, God and matter. I'm glad that you brought up the topic of the great invocation. There were 3 versions given, and the Tibetan has said that the very first one was misinterpreted, perhaps would be a good way to put it, that people thought that they could use it as a plea for peace. One of the definitions the Tibetan has given for evil is outworn good. What was once fitting and right is no longer suited. Like a pair of beloved jeans that you've grown out of. In a practical sense, it might help us to be able to articulate that in a fashion that those we encounter can appreciate. Evil, outworn good. And so we find with the third version of the Great Invocation, given to us at the end of the last great conflagration, the World War. But perhaps some of those events are coming around again. I will leave this to you to ponder. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good, that's true. We're facing something again. And it's coming in a different, like last time it was so physical. And there was such incredible death, you know, so many lives were lost in it. But this time it's coming in a different way, but with something of that intensity.
The destruction of glamours.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to think that the Christ made the decision to return at the culmination of that war, and with great veracity, you know, that ending of that war. And the great invocation was simultaneously given out. And you wonder, as John was intimating, what might be the result of this crisis period? You know, it's certainly not over yet, you know, it might just be starting in ferocity. And so I've wondered if at the end of this impasse or combustible period, that maybe then Christ will return.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is about the Christ return, because it's about this. It becomes more intense as that sort of externalization, basically, an externalization of the Christ, which is happening within the psychology of millions of people, and is happening within the collective. And as that becomes closer, that's why it's in esoteric work and all of our work, it's just important to stand, to me, like to stand. The heart is a good way of describing it if it's understood esoterically, not if it's understood sort of sentimentally, but esoterically, because it's the center of relationship and the center of right circulation, of the divine circulatory flow. So to stand there, which is different from being neutral, because actually it's the opposite of being neutral. It's standing with, because the Christ's coming is the coming of the plan. It's an initiatory stage in the plan, and the next step of the plan, the unfolding plan. I always used to think that, and I still do in a way, that the end of apartheid marked one of the extraordinary sort of magic around the final ending, but it marked one of the stages of the ending of the Second World War always for me, because it was it was more than anything else, because it was a philosophy and a legal system, a system of law, and that system of law was defeated. And the whole world was involved in that defeat, even though it was one country, everything was done in one country. But now we're still, as we should do, because it's all one, just like the First and Second World War from the hierarchy's perspective is one war. It's still one process that we're undergoing.
And it's interesting that it's kind of being focalized in that part of the planet that the Christ said, the Tibetan said, was overshadowed by a dark, overshadowing cloud that needed to be dissipated by the people who worked with invocation. They're the ones. And if we, because we're part of that, don't do that, it could spread, you know, and engulf the whole planet. So this time is totally, as Catherine said, you know, it's crucial to use the great invocation.
Exactly. And the way of doing that for me is not by putting the focus there, but in the background with that knowledge that everything depends upon just standing upon the deep esoteric thinkers to truly stand with the Christ, knowing that the Christ is in every human being and in every nation. So you're standing with that, and find our own way of doing it.
Yeah, I think that's important to mention, like you just said, that the word Christ is obviously something that's used by certain people as the majority, as the definition for that principle, but that Christ belongs to everyone. And it's even said by the Tibetan that when Krishna can be recognized as an emanation of the Christ, and then, that the brothers of the Jewish and the Christian and the Muslim faith can all see their higher connection to each other, and the values of the teachings of the Buddha as one aspect, like the Christ of the second ray of love, then there will be that fusing of these different religious traditions, and less, hopefully, animosity, more of a sense of brotherhood.
And to me, that's part of where that, like, to me, that's happening in a way that's quite surprising. Like it's happening at a depth that is very, like a deep source. It's a source of hope for me. Is what's happening at the heart of many of the religions, amongst the thinkers, amongst the deeper thinkers.
Well, and too, sorry to keep rambling on myself, but also too, it's been said that the real war is on the mental plane with the disciples and initiates, that it's the ideological battles. I think Great Invocation is the way in which disciples and initiates hold the tension on that plane of the plan for humanity, to clarify that plane. I think the fear and the glamours are, the astral body is said to not exist really. It's the mental body in which we should be working. And it's when we can hold that clarity, we can help decrease the fear for those who are focused more on the astral plane. But we have to work on the mental plane to hold that vision, like Michael's saying, of the plan, and keep that steady in the mind of humanity as the glamours are dissipated and the fear is neutralized.
There's a few more hands, but I think it's probably time.
I think we need to hear. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry, but I think we need to. I also need to, because I have not the train to catch.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. So I'm sorry that we're not getting to everyone. And please post something in the chat. And thank you everybody for holding this point of tension. The next there's a webinar, World Goodwill webinar next week on Wednesday at 12 noon in Eastern Time. And then the Libra full moon takes place on October the 6th. It's a Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, which will be again broadcast by Zoom. And just sort of immense gratitude for all those of us who are part of the Zoom call, but also to remember all of those who join in this work, particularly the full moon work, and also increasingly with the new moon work, who are working with meditation, building that alignment, and part of this sort of alignment and the work of the full moon and the new moon. So really just gratitude and holding in the light the importance of that work. So with that, so friends, thank you. Good.
Thank you, Steve.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. I've had an interesting travel day.
Yeah, Jack, what time is your